Beautiful place on my way here. My aim today really is to talk about South Africa, about the South African economy, how we've been shaping up, and how we've been doing as an economy, what our performance has been like, but very importantly then also hopefully to give you some indication of the dynamics behind it. In other words, what's kept the economy going, what perhaps have been the challenges, what have been the drain on the economy, where's the drag come from, so that when you leave here you have a clear understanding of the dynamics behind this economy. And then hopefully we'll also go and we'll delve a little bit deeper into the challenges South Africa face and give you hopefully some indication of where Nedbank in any case see this economy going over the next 3 to 5 years. All right, so that's what we aim to do. So let's start with South Africa's performance. Here you go. This sums it up. This is sort of a synopsis of our economic performance. Now, if you had to venture a guess, you would probably have a good sense that it's not going awfully well at the moment. I'm not sure what it's like in Bredasdorp, whether you are all roaring, but for South Africa as a whole, it's been a pretty tough year so far. And this graph really tries to show you how we've been shaping up. What you've got here in red is the value of all goods and services produced in this country. The economic term for it is the gross domestic product, but it's simply the value of all goods and services produced. And this is the cycle we're in at the moment. And this green bar here shows you the quarterly rate of change in that red line. So that is, in other words, South Africa's quarterly economic growth rate as it is quoted in the press. All right, so that's our official growth rate. And we're in this business cycle. So here's the recession of 2008, 2009. That was caused by the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008, which sent the world into recession. And not long after that, South Africa followed. An interesting fact, South Africa has never escaped the global slowdown, not even during the years of isolation. And the years of sanctions. And if the world grows, we grow. If the world's slow, we slow. If the world sinks into recession, not very long after that, we tend to sink into recession. And that's exactly what happened there. And once the world came out of recession, second half of 2009, interestingly enough, so did we. And we started to grow again. And we had this little boost from the 2010 World Cup, which looked like the recovery was going to be stronger than it really was, because obviously, the World Cup's not likely to be repeated every 3-5 years, not even every decade. So consequently, it's a once-off, and we got that little boost. And then it's really from 2011 onwards that we got a good sense of what this economy looks like in this particular cycle. And sadly, the news wasn't so good. There were two problems with this business cycle. The first problem is throughout this cycle, growth has been too slow. The best we did was in 2011 when we grew by 3.5%. The second problem with this particular cycle is that since 2011, we've been losing momentum. So A, growth is too slow. Secondly, we've been losing momentum as time goes by. If you go from 2011 to 2012, we only grew by 2.5%. You go into 2013, we managed only 1.9%. You come into the first quarter of this year, and oh my goodness, we shrunk by 0.6%. So growth literally evaporated. Okay, so that's part of the problem here. So we are very, very much on a downward sloping curve here, which is unfortunate. And we need to understand why that is the case. As an emerging market compared to other emerging markets, we're not faring awfully well at the moment. You look just north of our borders. I'm not sure where north is here, but just north of our borders, right? Essentially, sub-Saharan Africa, most countries are growing 4.5% as a bare minimum. They're doing 5.5% and 6% as a sort of an average. And then if you've got oil, which is the silly mineral, and you're in Angola, or you're in Ghana, or you're in Nigeria, you're clocking 7.5%, 8%, in some cases even 9%, depending on the base you're coming from. So we stand out, really, as being quite weak. We shrunk 0.6%, only managed 1.9% last year, compared to other African countries, which at its worst is growing at 4%. So that's quite a gap, that's quite a disparity. And we need to understand what is behind it. So why have we underperformed? Why has our growth performance been so disappointing compared to other African countries that have done better? Now, there are many ways to answer this question. There are many ways to get to the root to the problem. But we're going to do it a specific way. First, we're going to look at the industries that are really growing and sort of helping to keep the wheels on the bus turning in this economy. So we're going to try and identify those industries. And we're going to try and identify the industries that are putting the brakes on the economy, that's really dragging us down. And then we're going to try and understand what's been behind each performance. Okay? So that's how we're going to do it. So this is what we do here. It's a very busy graph, but it's actually an immensely simple graph. Now we take GDP, or the value of all goods and services produced in this country, and we index it to a certain point in time. That point has to be a normal point. There can't be any major disturbance there. We chose the beginning of 2007 because it's just before the global financial crisis struck. So it's a normalized point. And we really are looking at how the economy performed relative to that point in time. That's what an index does. You look, are you above the level where you were at the beginning of 2007? Yes, for goodness sake. That is a little bit of good news. We are. In the recession, are we above the level before we entered recession? Yes, at least the overall economy is above the level. Are we moving up? Are we moving down? So that's what indices give you a sense of. Right, so that's GDP. And then the other lines represent the value added of all your major industries, all right? And they also indexed to 100 in 2007. Now, if this is your average economy, your overall economy, the sectors that have generally kept the economy going are the ones that have outperformed your average rate, okay? So those are the ones that have grown faster than your overall economy. And the ones that have generally put the drag on the economy is the ones that have underperformed your average economy, okay, or your overall economy, however you want to express it. Now, if you look at the sectors above the line, they have something in common. Most of them are services industries. All right. So it would be wholesalers, retailers, transport and communication services. It would be banking, financial services. It would be also another one that features very strongly above the line would, of course, be government. Government features very strongly above the line. Or government services, whether it be healthcare services or just general government services, it features above the line. All of them generally tend to be services industries. The services industry relies on the domestic market as a source of demand, doesn't it? So it's the domestic market that's kept the wheels on the bus turning. But it's not been enough to produce growth of over 3% on a consistent basis for this economy. And the reason for that is it also needs the rest of the economy to grow and to create employment, to continue to feed that market so that it can grow by more than 3% per annum. All right, so that's been the problem. So where's the brakes coming from? Oh, and notable, the only producer above the line is agriculture, interesting enough. It's most of you guys, I think. So you've done your bit. Right? You've worked hard, you've done your bit. It's volatile because there are commodity prices and drought and weather conditions and all of those sorts of factors that come into play. But generally speaking, you have outperformed the average economy. The drag has come from three sectors. The first one being mining, no surprise there. The worst performing industry in South Africa. It's really in a sickly state, to put it mildly. And we appear to be fighting about really a declining industry and a shrinking industry. The other one is manufacturing. You can see there's the global recession. Manufacturing exports get hit very hard by the fall in global demand. The world economy starts to recover, and to be fair to manufacturing, it did experience a recovery. But that recovery is still well below the level where it was before it entered recession. So it's been a very slow recovery. Almost 5 years after the recession came to an end, you're still not back to the sort of levels where you were prior to the recession. So these are the two industries that have really been responsible for keeping growth so weak, and more recently been responsible for the shrinking in GDP overall. So what we've got here is a situation where these two also have something in common, don't they? They are all producers. They're also our exporters. They are our biggest exporters, mining and manufacturing combined. So if you have to generalize, you'd say, well, the thing that's keeping the wheels on the bus turning is everybody that services the domestic markets, with the exception of agriculture. All right, so they've been one of the star performers. But the strain in this economy, the drag on this economy, is coming from production and from exports, especially those in the mining and the manufacturing sector. And now we need to understand really why, don't we? Why are they underperforming? If we want to grow faster, we need to lift growth in these two industries. And in order to do that, we have to understand what is behind their poor performance, their underperformance. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation on. One of the answers are provided here already in this blue line that is just going literally nowhere. It's just flat, just literally nowhere. It's called power and water, where the biggest one is power, all right? So part of the reason these industries are underperforming is simply because there's no capacity to expand. Because there's no ability to expand capacity because there isn't enough power to allow it. All right. So we have power constraints in this country. We have an absolute power constraint in this country. And until we actually finish a power station, we're not going to lift that constraint. So it's virtually impossible to go and sink another shaft if you can't be guaranteed that you'll get the power to run that shaft. It's virtually impossible to build another furnace so you can produce steel and all sorts of other things unless you can be assured that you will be given the power to run that particular factory. So there's a constraint on their ability to produce. As soon as they start to gain momentum and they get to sort of a 3% growth rate, what we know is give it a month, give it 2 months, Eskom phones them and say, okay, the system's under pressure. We have virtually no reserve requirement left. You're going to have to cut production by 10%. So you can never move forward if you've constantly been told the moment you gain a little bit of momentum to cut production. So that is an absolute constraint on the entire economy. It affects everybody, I'm sure. It affects agriculture as well. But of course, it affects your heavy energy users in the mining and manufacturing sector so much more severely than the services industry that are not quite as energy intensive. Right, so now we have one reason why they've underperformed. Just to show you, of course, in the first quarter of this year, first half of this year, the strike in the mining industry was another factor. Labor issues, we'll talk about that a little bit later. The platinum mining industry went on strike on the 25th of January. They only finished that strike unbelievably, inconceivably, in the final week of June. So they claimed the first quarter, they claimed most of the second quarter. Just as they returned to work, NUMSA, which affects your steel and iron industries, embarked on strike. Luckily, that strike only lasted a month. There are still some running disputes among smaller manufacturers with NUMSA that refuses to accept the wage deal. I was at Unilever yesterday. Was it yesterday? I can't even keep up anymore. And they said to me that they signed the deal, but it is completely unsustainable. And they've binded themselves to a wage agreement that they know they can't afford just to end the strike, which will only come to an end in 3 years' time. All right? So the smaller companies are saying, hang on, we're not going to do that. We refuse. So there is still some elements, some workers that are being locked out of factories where employers are actually exercising their right to say, no, hang on, we will not sign that. But it's mainly affects your smaller manufacturers. So the impact on the economy probably started to fade from August onwards. So if we want to stage a recovery this year, it will have to come from this month onwards. Basically, the whole year has been claimed by strikes. Just to show you the economy remains weak, what we take here is a couple of key indicators: manufacturing, retail sales, wholesale sales, mining production, and car sales. We indexed them to 100 in 2008. There you can see that horrible little recession. We staged the recovery, some areas more rapidly than others, as I've already pointed out. Manufacturing's been disappointing, mining's been disappointing. It's mainly your services industries that kept things going. But can you see that even services are now coming under pressure? Even they appear to be dipping. So that is a significant difference between what we have this year and what we had the year before.